1, I had about 35 slides that I was thinking I was going to get through. How many do you think I got through? I through 5 of them. So this week I'm going to try to go a little faster. Maybe speak less from the abundance of my heart and speak more from the Word. But we're looking at Matthew chapter 5, verse 8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So I did my introduction last week, and I think we had a pretty good class. I think we made a pretty good point of the fact that Jesus used words and phrases, nouns and verbs, and he gave those words special meanings. There was context for the immediate and the present, but there was also context for the spiritual and for the eternal. And it's beautiful to see how throughout the entire Bible, certain words and certain verbs and certain phrases are just loaded with meaning and loaded with context and have a weight to them that just a casual reading through, it does make sense if you're casually reading it, but if you pause and you meditate and you really study what some of the words that Jesus used and some of the ways that certain words, the Spirit has used certain words throughout the Bible to have very special, deep connotations. And it's almost as if, and we're going to look at some verses today, it's almost as if there is a sort of a privileged class of human beings that are able to comprehend and to see and to hear what God is doing, what God has to say, what God has said, what God is continuing to do. And we're going to look at some of those today. Tim alluded to some of that in his lesson today, and it's a matter of the heart to be able to be in that elite company, okay, in the church. We are in an elite company because we're the saved. And Christ considers, and God considers us to be His family. So that is an elite group that we're in. And those of us that are in this elite group have a different comprehension and a different worldview and a different spiritual view than those that, for example, in Romans chapter 1, we're going to look at that one too. Some people are able to see things and not see them, okay? And some of us in this elite group, we're able to see things that are there, and it's like God is hiding in plain sight. If you look, you can see God and you can see the work of God, but not everyone is as attuned to that maybe as we are. And Jesus was very aware, and of course the prophets also were very aware that the heart matter, as Tim alluded to today, and as this verse, Matthew chapter 8, alludes to, it's a heart condition. To be able to see what God is doing and to be able to hear God's word and to be able to comprehend exactly what the message of the gospel is, as Jesus was talking to Nicodemus. He wasn't talking about being born again, but he used that phrase, he used that idea of being born again. He said, unless you're born again, what was the end of that sentence? You can't see the kingdom of heaven. So we are in a somewhat of an elite group. And again, I've wandered far away from my slides. So let's go back and look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 8. So blessed, the word blessed, and what I want to do in this study is do an exegetical look at each word that is in Matthew chapter 5, verse 8. Look at each word, and then look at that word in the context of the Beatitudes. Look at that word in the context of the Sermon on the Mount. Look at that word in the context of the book of Matthew, and then in the context of the whole Bible. Each one of those words has a biblical context. And what I want to make sure that I do in this study, and you can check me on this as well, I want to make sure that I am not coming up with something in my own mind and making this verse say what I want it to say. Okay? And that's true of any Bible study. We can't just look at the Bible as a way of proving what it is that we want to prove. You can use the Bible that way, but that is a terrible misuse of the Bible. So what I have been very careful and prayerful about in this study is making sure that I don't turn this verse into something that I want it to say. I want to look at each one of these words in context and in the context of the Bible, and let the Bible and let the Spirit tell me exactly what this means when it says that the pure in heart will see God. And what we're going to find is that the word blessed appears many, many times in the Bible. And traditionally, it has been translated as happy, privileged, satisfied, bountiful. It's not necessarily incorrect, but I've been able to see that there is a little bit more nuance to it than just happy, okay? It's difficult for me to think about being hungry and being happy. It's difficult for me to think about being poor and being happy. There's got to be just a little bit more to it than just that. And some of the more recent translations try to capture some of this nuance. Okay, so we should be on 8, on 7. Okay. All right, so this word for blessed is makarioi. Who or what is doing the action, or who is being described? Okay, there's two ways of looking at this. Someone or something is taking an action, and someone or something is the recipient of that action. So it could be a noun or a pronoun that is the subject of the verb in a particular sentence. In this case, a form of the word be, are. The pronoun and the action is someone who is acting, someone who is blessing. And there's someone who is being blessed. Okay? So there's someone that's doing the action, and there's someone who is receiving the action. So in that sense, the word blessed is someone who is receiving the blessing of God, and someone who is God who is giving that blessing. So the word blessed is reserved in the New Testament for something that God is doing to a particular class of people or to a particular person. In this case, in the Beatitudes, we have God doing the blessing to these various groups of people. The pure in heart, the hungry, the hungering for thirsting in righteousness. These particular different groups of people are receiving a blessing of some type. Okay. So God is the one in the Beatitudes who is doing the action. Blessed are those, the recipients of the action. In this particular verse, God blesses those whose hearts are pure. This is the New Living Translation. So it's more than just blessed are the pure in heart. It's God blessing this particular group of people, these people whose hearts are pure. And we're going to look at what each one of those groups of people are and what exactly it means in the context of the Beatitudes. So the word blessed is both the subject and the object. Okay? So that's why when the verses begin with blessed are, those people are both those people, that group of people, in this case, those who are pure in heart, that group of people are both the subject and the object of the sentence. So to be blessed in the sense of Matthew chapter 5 and the Beatitudes is a divine favor. It's a privilege that God is bestowing on that person or on that class of people. And as we know, God's favors and blessings are multitudinous. So now let's go back and look at the entire context of the Beatitudes with that in mind. So if you realize that you have a need for God, if you are in that particular group of people, that class of people, the promise is that God is going to bless you with the kingdom of heaven. Okay? So hungering and thirsting for righteousness is very obviously something that has to be taken in a non-literal way. A couple of these Beatitudes are very, very literal, and it's very clear that they're literal. Others of the Beatitudes allude to more than just the literal. Okay? So hungering and thirsting for righteousness is not something that necessarily is a literal thing. There's nothing that you can consume with your physical body that would satisfy your need for righteousness. Your need for righteousness is fulfilled by God, by Christ, by the Word of God. There is no physical sustenance for your body to provide you with righteousness and forgiveness. Those are things God bestows on us. If you're mourning, this one is a little more literal, but the result is obviously very spiritual. If you're mourning, God promises to bless you with His presence. And we know as Christians in that elite group of people as the church that we receive the Spirit as our comforter. Okay? So it's almost like there's a kind of a secret language that the Bible uses and that Christ uses, that if you're paying attention, you understand what He's saying. And the disciples had this problem. A lot of times Jesus would say something, and they're like, oh, what is he talking about? And they miss the point sometimes. If you're humble, this one is very practical. If you're humble, God promises to bless you with the whole earth, with the entire earth. And of course, that one is, we're not going to inherit the physical earth. I don't have any need to have this earth or anything in it. I feel like, I'm just kind of passing through, and I'm a steward for a very short time. But I look at the rest of the world, and I've been privileged to travel a little bit in this country and down in the islands and over in Europe, and there's really not. There's some beautiful places in the world, but there's really not anything that I want to inherit. I'm much more interested in what's beyond this earth, the next earth, okay? But this elite group of people and the church, the kingdom of heaven, the earth has basically received the church and the effect of the church and the effect of God's plan is what we inherit. So we have a very rich inheritance indeed. It's not anything physical. It's completely spiritual. If you crave God's hunger and righteousness, God promises to bless you with both. If you're merciful, the promise is that God's going to bless you with His mercy. If you're someone who loves peace and peacemaking, the promise is that you will be blessed with the reputation of being known as a child of God. God recognizes you as His child. This is something that we could take a very diversive path on and look at, and I would love to come back and do this at some point, maybe, and that is, how does God see us? How does God view us? And again, it comes down to being a heart matter. We know that God looks on the inward part. God looks at our hearts. He's not so interested in what our physical body looks like, thank goodness. But what God sees when God looks at us is a theme that runs throughout the entire Bible. And I think it would be a very profitable study. If you've purified your heart, if your heart has been purified, if you're in that particular group of people, what is the promise? What is the blessing? You're going to see God. That's very interesting, very intriguing to me. If you're persecuted and mocked for doing right and serving God, rejoice because, again, you're in elite company. The promise is that God blesses you with the kingdom of heaven. That is the church. And also, we know there is a future reward, and that is the reward that is in heaven. And here, Christ mentions both. He mentions the present, and He mentions the future. And I want to just point out that Matthew chapter 5 and verse 8, they will see, is a future-looking promise. Okay? It can be literally interpreted as they will see God, because at some point in time, we know we are going to actually see God, just like I can see that exit sign above the doors back there. All right? And there's no doubt in my mind that that exit sign is there.
I think I have finally worked out what pure in heart is. That was bothered me for years.
Okay?
In the Old Testament, a lot of people went off the track and worshipped man-made gods, and that they were whores. That's the only word I can think of right now.
Mm-hmm.
We worship only God. We don't have any other gods, so that's not pure in heart. Just like a husband and wife are pure in heart to each other. They don't go traipsing after some other partner.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, that's what pure in heart is. You
Okay.
don't have any other God in your life.
And part of the problem was that with the idols, and this happened with the children of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai, they wanted something that they could see. They wanted something that they could touch, something that to them seemed tangible. And God was not pleased with the fact that they weren't satisfied to see the manifestation of the pillar of fire and the cloud that led them. They weren't satisfied with seeing the hand of God part the Red Sea. They weren't satisfied with the great, vast, dark cloud that was hanging over Mount Sinai that was the very presence of God. They had seen all of those wonderful things. They had seen God manifested in all those ways, and yet they still turned to an idol. Their heart was in the wrong place.
And that made God very angry.
It certainly did.
He just hates people not worshiping
being pure in heart is something that we're going to look at in detail, exactly what that means. There is a function that God and the Spirit performs in purifying our heart. There is that action that God does, but there's also the purification of the heart that we are responsible for cultivating. Okay? The Spirit comes in and cleans our hearts, cleans our minds, cleans our conscience. We're going to look at those particular verses. Did I hear the bell? Okay. The first bell. Okay, so I've got what, 3 minutes, 4 minutes? The Spirit does His work when we're baptized, when we're purified by water and by the blood of Christ. The Spirit does His work, and our hearts and our minds are purified, and we begin the transformation process of cultivating the mind of Christ. One of those parts of that process is keeping the heart pure. I have a group of 3 girls that come and clean my house every 180 days. Okay? And one of the things that I really love is when I come home and they've been there to look at my kitchen counter, and it's all arranged and it's spotless and clean, and there's a nice aroma in the air and everything, and I know that the elves have been there. Okay? I cannot, over the next 180 days, just let the dishes pile up in the sink. I can't let the olive oils be sprayed and left all over the counter. I can't let the food crumbs remain on the stove. I have to do my part to maintain the cleaning, the deep cleaning that they did. Okay, the same is true. The Spirit and the Lord and the Word do the deep cleaning, but it's up to us to keep cultivating our pure heart. And again, we didn't get nearly as far as I hoped that we would get. We got maybe 10 more slides done. But anyway, we're going to continue on next week. Any other questions, comments?
I just love the idea of, the phrase, talking about the Beatitudes, blessed are those who pure the heart, for they will see God. The blessing we receive is more of God, right? That's the blessing.
That's right. That's exactly right. Exactly right. God is going to do something very, very special for those that have a pure heart. And all the Beatitudes are special. But for me, this one has, the Bible has a whole lot more to say about purity of heart, being able to see God, being able to comprehend God and what God's doing in our lives. So this week, your assignment for next week is look and see if you see God this week. I'm going to ask you next week if you saw God. Have your answer ready. All right. Love you. Thank you. Bye.